I woke up on another day that tasted like all the others. John was already up, the smell of stale coffee hung in the air. "Leaving now," he mumbled, his usual morning farewell. Not a kiss, not a glance back. It had been like that for, God, I don't even remember how long. I used to feel a pang, a sort of sadness. Now I feel a dull sort of nothing. I trudged through my own routine. Toast I barely tasted, a shower that felt just as mechanical. Work was the usual. Spreadsheets, the hum of water cooler gossip, and Greg. What was it about him? That crooked smile. The way he made me actually laugh out loud instead of the polite chuckles I gave everyone else. It started small, texts under the desk, about nothing much really. But it was something. A joke nobody else got, a compliment on my dress. Small but heady. I felt a thrill I hadn't in ages. I still thought about John, of course, mostly from duty. I made us the same boring dinners, did our laundry, all the things a good wife does. Yet, my mind kept wandering back to Greg's messages during those mindless chores. The next morning, I caught Greg's eye across the office. Something flickered, a silent invitation, and a jolt went through me. A jolt I knew wasn't just about stolen glances anymore. Did he feel it too? Could this actually be happening? I tried pushing it down. John was my husband. It was stupid, reckless. But that damn smile wouldn't leave my head. That night after dinner, when John was snoring beside me, I checked my phone. A simple, "Thinking of you," from Greg. My heart actually pounded. This was the wrong kind of exciting. I knew that, but some part of me, the part that had felt invisible for so long, craved it. Yet, before I could even think, my fingers started typing back. Me too. I hit send, and everything changed. That night was different. Everything was brighter, louder, even the taste of the supermarket wine at home. I tossed and turned beside John, guilt and excitement warring in my head. My phone buzzed. Greg, asking if I was okay. Relief washed over me. Someone was paying attention, someone saw me, saw the real me. The one buried under years of just existing. The lies came easily. Working late, I'd tell John, my voice barely wavering. It was a nasty project, I couldn't leave it halfway, he'd understand. Even the girls at work became part of the deceit. Drinks with the gang, I'd laugh to them, then slip away for stolen afternoons with Greg. Parking garages, dim cafes, hell, even the backseat of his car. These weren't romantic. They were rushed, frantic, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I'd never been that girl, the one who made reckless decisions. It felt exhilarating, a dangerous, exhilarating high-wire act. The constant fear of getting caught was intoxicating, a rush unlike anything I'd felt before. Close calls became part of the thrill. John almost seeing a text, a friend giving me that knowing look, narrowly missing an unexpected phone call while I was with Greg. But getting away with it was like fuel to the fire, each near miss pushing me further into this double life. Suddenly, everything about John was wrong. His chewed nails became disgusting, his stupid snoring intolerable. The way he never even looked when I walked into a room felt like an insult. Why did I put up with it for so long? Greg didn't miss a thing. Not my new haircut, a witty comment, the way I nervously straightened my skirt. He noticed me, made me feel like I was a person worthy of being noticed. It was like a drug, a dangerous one, but I craved it more with each passing day. I knew this was a runaway train, but I didn't want to get off. Every lie I told, every risk I took, made me feel a twisted sort of power. I wasn't just John's wife anymore. I had this whole other life, one built on shaky ground, but thrilling nonetheless. It was messy, reckless, and exhilarating as hell, a side of myself I never knew existed until now. Greg was gone on a week-long business trip and it was a whiplash. One minute, I was consumed by him, his texts, planning our next rendezvous. Then, suddenly, there was this quiet emptiness. But, under the relief was a nagging dread. I missed him, yes, but it also felt like I'd been running on empty and just now realized how tired I was. That's when John began to change. Or maybe, he was the same, and I was finally seeing it. The way he lingered at the kitchen table after dinner, looking at me expectantly. It hadn't been this intense between us in ages. "You okay?" he asked one night. "You seem different." The fork clattered against my plate. Different? My laugh sounded too high, even to me. "I'm fine, just tired, that's all." He didn't look convinced. I could feel him watching me even when I pretended to be absorbed in some stupid show on TV. One afternoon, John's phone buzzed with a text, left on the countertop while he was in the garage. Stupid curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't a text, it was a photo of us at some work party years ago. The text above it just said, "Remember when she used to smile?" The room went icy. He'd noticed. Of course he'd noticed. After that, I was on edge all the time. I'd wake up in a sweat, convinced John was holding my phone, staring at a message from Greg that I'd forgotten to delete. Maybe he was going through my stuff or following me. Every slightly weird look from him was proof that he knew. The night before Greg's return, John asked, "Can we talk?" Like, really talk? He sounded so pathetically hopeful, it almost made me ill. "There's nothing to talk about," I snapped, the defensiveness coming too easily. "I'm going to bed." I didn't sleep a wink. The truth hung in the air, a thick, suffocating fog I couldn't escape. Maybe it was time to end this thing with Greg, a clean break. But the thought of it felt like a part of me was dying. The weekend with Greg was booked, a cozy cabin by the lake, far away from prying eyes. The lie to John had rolled off my tongue easily, a work retreat I couldn't miss. Shame was there, a dull ache, but it was drowned out by the surge of anticipation. It felt like stealing back time that was rightfully mine. Packing felt like a game. 2 sets of everything. The sensible clothes for John, the things that made me feel like the woman I was with Greg stuffed at the bottom of my bag. I thought I was careful. But, as I rushed out the door, a single earring fell to the floor. It was one Greg had given me. I froze, the image of John finding it flashing in my head. It was too small, he'd never notice, I convinced myself. But maybe some part of me wanted him to. When I got to the cabin, there was no more room for doubts, only Greg. His smile, his touch, everything else, the world we'd left behind, faded away. Saturday night, after too much wine and laughter, I woke up with a pounding heart and a blurry phone screen. There were missed calls, a voicemail from John. "Hey, found this on the floor. Your earring? Call me back." His voice was flat, so different from his usual warmth. Shit, he knew. Dread washed over me. Every shared moment with Greg now felt toxic, tainted. I got home Sunday night to an empty house. John wasn't there, but neither were his things. Then I saw it, my earring, on the kitchen counter, next to a note that simply said, "We need to talk." He was forcing my hand. John walked in an hour later, looking 10 years older, exhaustion etched on his face. He held up that damned earring. "Please, just tell me," he said, his voice breaking. The words jammed in my throat. Then, a sort of rage flared up inside me. Rage at John for his pathetic sadness, and at myself for this whole disastrous mess. "Yes," I spat out. "Yes, I'm seeing someone else. He's better, kinder. He actually makes me happy." The words hung in the air, brutal and sharp. The look in John's eyes was unbearable, a mix of devastation and something like disgust. It was the final push. Years of stifled resentment, of unvoiced disappointments bubbled to the surface, and neither of us could have prepared for what came next. After I slammed the door and stormed out, I figured that was it. End of story. John would lick his wounds, I'd move on with Greg, and we wouldn't have to look at each other ever again. Turns out, I'd never been more wrong about anything in my life. The next few weeks were a blur. John moved into the spare room, the house heavy with unspoken pain. Greg was all concerned calls and dramatic texts, but I barely had the energy to respond. The thrill was gone, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. John had disappeared too. Physically he was there, going through the motions, but his eyes looked dead inside. Then things changed. I noticed John coming home later, leaving before I woke up. He was on his phone all the time, not like he was talking to anyone, more like searching, scrolling. Once, I caught him staring at my Instagram. Stupid of me. I hadn't made it private after the whole Greg thing started. Then one morning, I felt the shift, that same icy fear I had before John discovered the earring. He looked different, not defeated, something sharper. "Going to be late tonight," he said, a forced lightness to his voice. "Don't wait up." That night, I heard him leave again. Curiosity, and a desperate need to know what the hell he was up to, wouldn't let me sleep. A stupid move, I knew it, but I crept out and followed his car. That's when I saw him pull up outside Greg's apartment complex. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd throw up. The world turned upside down. Greg, my savior, my escape, was now somehow mixed up in John's silent revenge plot. I had to warn him. As I approached Greg's familiar door, I heard the voices, John's, tight with anger, then Greg's smarmy, dismissive replies. He hadn't cared, not really. He saw me as an escape from his own boring life, just like I'd seen John. I could hear the fight escalate, a scuffle, then silence. A terrible, bone-chilling silence. I don't know what made me push the door open. What I saw will haunt me forever. It wasn't the John the first knew at all. It's like those years of quiet resentment had built up, then broken, leaving something unpredictable and terrifying in its place. The air around me crackled with tension as I drove home. I didn't know what I'd find, only that it couldn't be good. I kept replaying the scene at Greg's, the look in John's eyes as he stood over Greg's battered body. My rescuer had become my captor. When I pulled into the driveway, my hand trembled as I turned off the ignition. Every instinct screamed at me to run, disappear, but I was frozen. Whatever game John was playing, I had to face it. He was in the kitchen, eerily calm, like that whole scene at Greg's hadn't happened. "Sit down," his voice was flat, and I felt a shiver down my spine. "We need to talk." My mouth opened, words of apology, of explanation, swirling in my head, but he cut me off. "Not you, him." He gestured towards the hallway, my blood turning to ice. "Greg's here?" I stuttered, terror and confusion washing over me. A slow, cruel smile spread across John's face. I invited him, figured we could all clear the air. He seemed surprised, he said, savoring the word. "But he's agreed to join us." I felt faint. Greg was here, in my house. John had lured him in with promises of what? A truce? Understanding? I thought of Greg's bloodied face in that apartment, and my stomach churned. John motioned me to sit, an unnerving glint in his eyes. I was a pawn in a twisted game I didn't understand, and I couldn't stop the question pounding in my head. Who was the real monster here? "Greg's not a fighter," I whispered, trying to find some logic in the chaos. "He won't." My voice trailed off as we heard footsteps. Greg emerged from the shadows, his cocky swagger replaced by a trembling fear. When he saw me, his eyes went wide. "You too?" he stammered, a whine creeping into his voice. "This is insane, man. I get it, you're pissed, but..." "Sit," John snapped, pointing to the chair across from me. I sat, a silent witness as John began to weave a chilling web. He exposed our every lie, every sordid detail, his voice growing colder with every word. Greg stammered out pathetic excuses, but it was clear, the upper hand was gone. The air was thick with dread, and the question blazed in my mind. What was going to happen? And what role did I play in whatever horrific ending John had planned? John turned toward me. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't end in bloodshed. I was wrong. "You want to be with him, right?" John's voice was like a snake slithering over ice. "Go on. Tell him how much you love him, how you can't live without him." I recoiled, bile rising in my throat. Greg stared at me, his eyes pleading for me to deny it all, to save myself. But what was there to save? I'd made my choices. My voice came out barely above a whisper as I choked out the words Greg had whispered to me countless times. "I love you. I can't go on without you." Lies had never tasted so bitter. Greg's pathetic relief turned into a smug grin. "See? It's not my fault, man. She came to me." John cut him off with a cruel laugh. "Oh, I don't blame you, Greg. I understand." He pulled out a folder, thick with papers, and tossed it onto the table. Greg's eyes widened. "I did some digging," John said in a chillingly conversational tone. "Turns out, this isn't your first rodeo, Greg. Quite the track record, in fact." The blood drained from Greg's face. I watched, horrified, as John laid out every sordid detail. Past affairs, women whose lives he'd ruined. This wasn't about me. It was about revenge for every woman Greg had ever used. "Bank accounts, investments, that fancy car, it's all a house of cards," John continued. "A few calls, some well-placed leaks, and poof. Gone. Along with your reputation." Then, he did the unthinkable. He turned to me. "You'll send that email, the one detailing his lies, to his boss. You'll forward me copies of those transfers to all those secret accounts, right, darling?" His voice dripped with icy venom. "You know, the ones you opened under fake names to keep his money safe?" I was trapped. I'd always prided myself on being smart, but all my schemes had led me here. A conspirator in my own downfall. My hand shook as I reached for the folder. John's eyes locked on mine. My betrayal was now a tool for his torment. As I began to type, Greg's desperate pleas crashed against my ears, his world crumbling. Yet, I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just a dead numbness spreading through my veins. In the end, they both got exactly what they deserved. John still hadn't come home. The house, always too quiet, now felt like it was closing in on me. Same old leftovers in the fridge, same old mindless TV shows droning on. Nights were the worst. Lying there beside him, I could hear the space between us, a chasm filled with unspoken resentments and a weariness that went bone deep. It was this gnawing emptiness, more than boredom, that made me reach for my phone the day of that company picnic. Don't get me wrong, John's a good guy. Works hard, provides, all that stuff. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being a couple and became more like roommates. Those little touches, inside jokes, the way he used to look at me like I was the only woman in the world, all gone. I missed feeling desired, damn it. So yeah, when I saw Mike across the crowd at that picnic, it was like a jolt. We used to have this easy rapport, a way of bouncing ideas off each other. He hadn't changed much, maybe a little older, little wiser, but that damn smile still lit up his whole face. We fell into conversation like no time had passed, our laughter cutting through the dull chatter around us. Then, just a casual touch as he passed me a drink, and a shiver ran down my spine. Nothing major, probably barely noticeable, but it felt like a spark I hadn't felt in years. The lies started small. Running late at the office became stolen coffee breaks with Mike. Texts that should have been about grocery lists became whispered jokes and flirtations that had me blushing like a teenager. In my head, it was a harmless distraction. It wasn't like John and I had this passionate, all-consuming love anymore. I craved that rush of feeling wanted, feeling alive, and Mike gave me that. But the guilt started gnawing at me almost immediately. Every time I smoothed down my dress for a work lunch with Mike, John's face would flash in my mind. Sure, he was oblivious, but that didn't make it right. Deep down, I knew I couldn't keep fooling myself, thinking this was just a fling. Every text I sent Mike, every lie I told John, pulled me further down a path I wasn't sure I wanted to be on. I just didn't know how to turn back. That night with Mike at the dimly lit bar after work felt electric. Our knees brushing under the table, laughter bubbling up as we traded stories, the way he held my gaze just a beat too long. It ignited something in me that had been dormant for far too long. The realization itself was a shock. When did I become a woman content with fading into the background of her own life? I knew I was playing with fire, but it felt strangely exhilarating. The lies were easy, embarrassingly so. Long meeting tonight, sorry. I'd text John, my cheeks flushed not from work stress but from the thrill of it all. It started to feel like a game, one where I got to be someone bolder than John's dutiful wife. The stolen lunches with Mike, the quick rendezvous in empty conference rooms during work calls, my previously predictable routine was suddenly shot through with heart-pounding exhilaration. I was alive, desired, seen for the first time in ages. Sure, there were close calls. John almost catching me on the phone mid-laugh with Mike, a friend mentioning my glow, and asking if I had a new workout regimen or something. Each time, I managed to wriggle out of it, and with each escape, I grew bolder, fueled by some sick desire to push fate further. Then, John started to change too. He'd linger by the doorway when I was getting ready for my girls' nights, looking at me with a question in his eyes. I hated that questioning look, but it weirdly motivated me, twisted and tangled as it sounds. Hair looks nice, he'd mumble, an awkward attempt at a compliment. It wasn't the sweet nothings Mike was whispering in my ear, but I used those moments to justify my choices. John was so clueless, so checked out it only made it easier to convince myself this wasn't hurting him. That I deserved to feel special, alive, wanted. The problem was, the more I lied, the harder it was to look at John at all. The little annoyances I'd always brushed off the way he chewed too loudly, his same boring stories repeated endlessly now became unbearable. My whole world started to shift, and with it, my excuses for my betrayal became stronger, amplified by a mix of desperation and a misplaced sense of entitlement. I should have been scared, disgusted even. But the thrill of the deception, the danger of it all? That hooked me deeper every day, a dangerous, addictive poison I couldn't resist. My hands were shaking as I packed for my cabin weekend with Mike. Excitement, nerves, shame. Everything swirled in a toxic cocktail that tasted like freedom and poison at the same time. I had to leave my phone behind, too obvious, too stupid a risk. It was like cutting my lifeline, but also a strange relief. The drive to the cabin was blurry. I'd lost the ability to focus on anything but Mike, the stolen weekend, throwing caution to the wind for once. Then, as I was unpacking, I saw it. A single earring tangled in my scarf, the one Mike had gifted me. I almost threw up. It was always going to end in disaster, I knew that somewhere deep down. This was the moment it all came crashing down. John called, his voice strained. I found something. Dot, are you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to figure it out myself? My stomach turned to ice. He knew. Every lie, every deception, shattered at my feet. But what terrified me more than his anger was the hurt in his voice. It cut deeper than any rage could have. What came out of my mouth wasn't an apology, but an explosion fueled by years of unspoken frustration. Yes, damn it, I'm with someone. Someone who sees me, someone who actually makes me feel alive. I choked out the words, tears of shame and defiant anger mixing. You were never there, John. Too busy, too tired, too damn checked out to even bother. His silence was deafening. Then, with a coldness I'd never heard before, he said, "Fine. We'll finish this when you get back." The moment I hung up, I knew there was no coming back from this. I'd driven a wrecking ball through our marriage without stopping to think where the pieces would fall. A few days later, I arrived home to a chillingly empty house. John wasn't there, but a note on the kitchen counter stopped my heart. "Meet me at Mike's. 8 p.m. sharp. Let's sort this out once and for all." I understood then. John wasn't the same man I'd fooled for so long. This wasn't about yelling or tears. This was something colder and far more